right, as we get started today, a few things. In just a couple minutes, we're going to go over Chapter 7 in our book, which is on design patterns. So we're going to do that in just a couple minutes. But before we do, a couple things. First, yes, and if you're here today, you've already heard this, but that Swift book is in, I guess it's what, $49.99? Well, yeah, $28.06. They also have used ones, which I love because it just literally came out, and there's used ones now for $24.06. All right, so that's the first thing. Again, I'm not going to require that you buy the book because a couple people have asked because we didn't know when it was going to come in. So there it is, and they don't even have the write-up and stuff on it yet, I don't think. Let's see. Cover beginning. Question got asked to me this morning, is this like the other Untitled books? And the answer is yes and no. It's yes in that Untitled writes in a very similar style with all their books, but it's no in that the Android book has just got like 8 projects in it. This one talks all about Swift, period. Intro to Swift programming, introduction to classes, objects, methods, and functions, control statements, functions and methods, a deeper look, arrays, introduction to closures, dictionaries, classes, a deeper look, structures, enumerations, and nested types, inheritance, polymorphism, and protocols, generics, operator, overloading and subscripts. And then you'll notice it's not till you get to Chapter 13 where they have full apps. And Chapter 13 has got the welcome app, and Chapter 14 has got the tip calculator app. So yes, it's written like a Untitled book is written, but no, it's not like our Android book because it focuses more on the language than it does apps in the language. All right, I'm still planning on going with that PDF that I gave you. You're more than welcome to buy this. There should be ample copies at the bookstore. I'd ordered about a dozen of them. All right, so that's the first thing. Second thing, as we get started up in here, as always, if you'd go over to the P drive for this class, there is a folder out there with today's date on it. If you'd go into that folder and find the CH07 folder and copy that to your virtual desktop, to your, that should be XAMPP, not CAMP, to your XAMPP htdocs folder. So I'll leave that there for a minute. All right? The third thing, out of 4, the third thing as we get started. Remember last week when I told you about this gentleman who called named Corey Skaggs who was interested in having either an app or a website done for this back in the yards thing? Well, he's coming in this afternoon at 1. I don't know what he's looking for. I don't know if he knows what he's looking for. Also, he works for this place. He's not the owner. So he's going to say what he thinks the owners want, but the owners are in California and he can't get a hold of them. All right? But I said still, come in and explain what you want. And we'll see if we've got somebody who's interested in working on. I still don't know if he wants a website, if he wants a mobile app, or if he wants both. All right? I really and truly, I mean, does he want a website that would work on a mobile device and a non-mobile device? Does he want just a mobile app? I don't know. Okay? That's the third thing. And the fourth thing is everybody in here is getting a handout right now. Everybody. Even Mike. Even John when he comes. But it may not make a lot of sense now. It'll make sense as we go on. Okay? The handout looks not like that. The handout looks like this. And I've got just one for my name on it. And let me explain it to you before I hand it out. Then I will hand it out. What I did was I went online and I tried to find out what somebody had considered. I don't even know who that somebody is, but what somebody considered to be the 25 greatest movies of all time. All right, and I don't know with that if that's 25 based on the sales of the movie, if it's based on this person's likes and dislikes. I'm not sure. And not to be funny or anything, I don't really care. These are the ones I decided to use. We're going to use this for our project in this class that we do as a class. Okay? So every one of you is going to get this, and it'll have your name on it. I just want hard copies. I'll go and input the actual data. So let's say for me, all right, you can do them by hand. You don't have to do these online. I'm going to give you a hard copy. But let's say they aren't. But let's just say that my favorite movies were, like I said, they're not. But let's say they were Godfather, Raging Bull, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. If I liked one Godfather, I guess I got to like the other one. And Vertigo. All right, so in other words, you will all take, and at a minimum, you will put an X by one of these movies, and at a maximum, you'll put it by 5 of them. Does that make sense? We're going to build an app based on this, and we build the app, we're going to build it in about 4 parts. The first part, all we're going to put in there is just the HTML. All right, so we get it working at a sort of a level. Then we're going to go in and we're going to add PHP, object-oriented PHP, or at least as much as I can get done. Okay, and what's going to happen is when you run this, if you pretend this is your screen here and this is your app, over here, it's going to have all the users, and it'll have each one of you. So in other words, if I click Jeff Scott over here, what I'd have would be the 5 movies that I liked over here, and then in my content area over here, I'd have the other 20 areas. And I'll be able to add favorite movies or delete favorite movies. Does that make sense? And we're going to do that for each and every one of you. Okay? Now, I decided to keep it like this and just pick these movies. So you might say with a lot of them, well, hell, I don't watch movies from back in 1958. You got to be ancient. I know I was 2 then. But you get the idea. So just pick out any 5, 1 through 5. At least pick out 1 so you've got something in there. All right? And as we do this, again, you'll be able to do different things with users, add new users, remove users. All of you are going to be in there. There's not going to be enough time to implement an entire admin system. In other words, logging in and the like, there's just not going to be enough time. Not to do that and give you a project. So if Zach says, oh, no, Mark doesn't like this movie, technically he'd be able to change it. But it's his copy of that. Does that make sense? So again, I've got a copy for each one of you. And I'm going to pass them out now. And even the people who aren't here today, for whatever reason, I've got copies for them. Because I'd like to put about 10 people in here as we start. And they're in alphabetical order. This is for a project we're going to end up doing in this class. So just put, literally manually, using a pen or pencil, just put an X and 5 movies that you consider to be favorites. And again, I have no way of knowing whether you actually mean these or not. So if you put in movies in here that make no sense, it's okay, but at least you've done it. All right? I'm building the database for this right now. So each one of you is going to be in there as a user. And I will, at least initially, you'll have the 5 movies that you pick will be your movies. Does that all make sense? All right, and again, you didn't hear all this, but the gentleman who contacted me last week about having either an app or a website or something for this Back to the Yards, he's coming in at 1 o'clock today. All right, I have no idea what he's going to say. The other thing, too, about that guy, just so you know, he's got one of those voices, sort of like John Wanda's. John is doing next week. He is doing the Vets Fair. He's going to be the MC because he's got kind of a disc jockey voice. This guy today, he sort of does, but he talks like he's a disc jockey. So he'll always, he'll get done with saying something. He goes, okay, then later. And so he's got a voice where he could be 20 and he could be 80. I don't have any idea how old he is. All right? But when he comes in here, please, and I'm being serious here, let's be courteous. All right, so when he does come in, if you have to go to the bathroom before class if you can. All right, and keep your cell phones muted just for the time he's here, please. I'd appreciate that. All right, and then the other thing I had told you to do already was, again, to go over to the P drive for the class, and under the folder with today's date on it, there is another folder in there that's got CH07. Copy that folder to your virtual desktop under your C:\\XAMPP/HT docs folder. Now, just so you know, in this folder right here, the one that's in blue now, in that folder is this folder and another folder that's got a bunch of stuff in it. It's got a bunch of documents and documentation on design patterns. Okay? Chapter 7 is on design patterns. You can buy entire books on design patterns. In fact, kind of the book that's considered to be, for lack of better words, the creme de la creme for design patterns, that book was actually written 21 years ago. Everybody hear that? That's how old it is. You can go out and find it on Amazon today, and Amazon doesn't have a lot of books in IT that are that old. They really and truly don't. But you'll notice if I go out here to Amazon, which I'm going to do as soon as the system lets me, and I go out to books, and I'm putting in object-oriented design patterns. This is it right here. Design Patterns, Elements of Reusable Object-Oriented Software, November 10th, 1994. And you'll notice it has 382. This, and with enough people reviewing a book, do the math here. All right, 382 reviews, and out of those 382, 330 of them are 4 or 5 stars. You're always going to find people, no matter how good or bad a book is. All right, they're always, going to rate it high or they're going to rate it low. All right. Now, back in the day when we were teaching object-oriented systems analysis and design, for 1 year, I used this book, Applying UML Patterns, An Introduction to Object-Oriented Analysis and Design and Iterative Development. Notice how old that book is, 2004. So there are a lot of books out there, but the majority of them are older. All right. So let me jump back into here. I'm going to do the same thing I asked you to do. In other words, went out to the P drive, CIS, 152, 164, spring 2015 in class. There's the folder with today's date on it, 2-3. And again, it's got 2 folders in it. It's got one folder, I'll just drag it up here and copy it to the desktop. It's got one folder that's got the Chapter 7 stuff in it. We're going to look at that momentarily. And it's got another folder in it that's called Design Patterns. All right? So I want to open up a few of these. I'm not going to open up every one, but there's a couple of these I just want to mention to you. These two, 5 common PHP design patterns and 5 more PHP design patterns. These are 2 articles from IBM, all right, and they're both well written, okay? Again, if you say, are they the best thing you've ever read? No, but they're both well written. Notice they're both about 15 pages or so long. So there's 5 common patterns, all right, and some of these, again, are what are talked about in this chapter. All right. Let's see. There's another thing that's out here. I think this is, no, that's not it. There. Again, all this stuff you have out there, all right? This is literally 1 page long. It says Design Pattern Tutorials. And notice they give you 5, 12, and 10, 22 common design patterns. All All right. One of the ones I believe that's talked about in this chapter is the factory pattern. So if I take my mouse and control click on that one, these individual articles, and you've got these too for the four that are for this chapter. These are based on Java code. All right. But the stuff that's in them on patterns is good. All right. And the only other thing I wanted to show you, let's see, I think that's the one. Yeah, this one is really, I thought, if you read nothing else, or if you page through nothing else, you might want to look through this one. It's called The Beginner's Guide to Design Patterns. It's 11 pages long. They explain the 3 types of design patterns, those being structural, creational, and behavioral, because this chapter will talk about one or more of each. Notice structural, it says, they deal with relationships between entities. All right, what are entities? It depends. All right, that could be, if it was a database, it could be the relationship between tables. It could be the relationship between databases. If you're talking object-oriented code, it's typically the relationship between classes. All right. Then second, you've got creational patterns. As it says, it provides a way to instantiate, making it easier to create objects in a way that suits the situation. Again, you're going to see these in just a minute. Finally, there's behavioral. As it says, they're used in communications between entities to make it easier and more flexible for these to communicate. Again, one thing about design patterns, I've mentioned this before with PHP. PHP is not an object-oriented programming language. PHP, like JavaScript, is an object-based programming language. In other words, you can become an unbelievably proficient PHP programmer and only use procedural PHP where you never do anything object-oriented. Just like you can do it the same way with JavaScript. All right, but a lot of code that's out there is PHP code. All right, a lot of people who, when they look for an object-oriented solution to a problem, the first thing they look for is there a design pattern that would help me get started? All right, so it's important that you look through these and at least look at the different stuff that's in here. Again, it goes through their strategy, and it literally gives you just a simple explanation. It says, fine, but how would I use this? Then another one, fine, but how do I use this? Then another one, fine, but how do I use this? All right, so it goes through about 5 or 6 of these. Okay, I'm not going to run through any of it because I'm just going to run through the 4 that Ullman talks about in the chapter. All right, but if you want more, again, if anything, I probably gave you way too much with all this stuff that's in here. All right, and this second one, this Design Patterns 2, this second article by IBM had code with it, PHP code. All right, so there's a bunch of stuff in there, again, if you have an interest. If you don't, then you're never going to look at it, whatever. All right. No, it's because I thought I was on here and I wasn't. But you are right. So this is what we're going to start looking at, except you have to spell localhost, not localhost. Yeah, it's running. Something's going on here that it doesn't like. We'll come back to it. Hopefully we can get this, whatever the problem is, we'll get it fixed shortly. Even if it means getting out and getting back in again. That's fine. All right, so let's start talking about design patterns. All right. So if you're following along, I'm on page 213 in your book. And I like what Ullman does, and he does it here because he typically tries to give you a fairly simple example of what he's talking about. It's a recommended best practice for solving a particular problem. It's typically done very generically, but it's in a way to get you started. That's the idea. All right. So what he talks about in this chapter are the singleton pattern, the factory pattern, the composite pattern, and the strategy pattern. That's the whole chapter. So even though it's 10:24, we'll still finish sometime around 11 o'clock. All right. Since he's here, let me... Zach, we're going to be working on this for a project, for our project in here, so even if you make them up, I have no way of knowing, but if you could put your five favorite movies out of that list. Okay. And I'll pick them all up when we go to break. All right. There really are, just so you know this, and I'd have to look through that list of the stuff that I gave you, but literally in here someplace, one of these articles that's in here, and I don't remember which one it is, but one of the ones that's in here, I wish I knew it so I could show it to you. It literally shows there are 23 different design patterns. The people who wrote that book from 1994, they were called the GOF, which stood for the Gang of Four. They were four people who were very, very innovative in the field, and they came out and talked about, you know, what we should do, why we should do it, etc. All right, so maybe I'll find it during the break. I don't really care. Now, again, turning the page here and take a look on I'm on page 214. Again, I don't want to read to you. Design patterns aren't code. They're a way of thinking. They're a mindset for doing something. And as it says, it doesn't define a solution, but also the problem it's trying to understand. In other words, it's very easy to pick the wrong design pattern. Not only that, design patterns by some people, they're such a bad thing that, and you can look this up, that there's a thing called anti-patterns. Okay? I will tell you, I forgot to say this to you earlier, so I'm going to mention this right now, that if I go out to Wikipedia and I put in here design patterns, and I've got this saved for you also, but the point is, someplace in there, yeah, of course it doesn't show me that. Oh, there's some stuff from the book, but someplace in here, in one of the Wikipedia things that's in here, they list all 23 of them. All right, and I've got it saved for you. I don't remember what I called it, though, that's all. All right. It says a design pattern is not made up of just a problem and a solution, but it's got four pieces. The name of the design pattern, a discussion of the problem. Hopefully, what I'm going to try to do in the next week or so, and some of the stuff that we've been going over, is to kind of bring together stuff that we've been doing for the last 2 years. And one of the things back in the day, back in September or August of, 2013, when you started here, that ideally at least I said to you, was when you start going through and you start figuring out how to solve a problem, the first thing you need to do is understand what the problem is. And that's the biggest problem that people have. And I've given this example before because it really holds true. It's the old adage about the guy who comes into a doctor's office and his arm is hanging limply by his side, and the doctor looks at it, puts a splint on it, and as he's walking out the door, he goes, "Doc, what about my sore throat?" All right, well, if the doctor doesn't know you've got a sore throat, you come in there with an arm hanging funny, and the doctor doesn't give you, a quick once-over, the doctor doesn't know. So if really the reason that you came in there was for a sore throat, you should tell the doctor it's for a sore throat, type of an idea. In much the same way, typically what programmers do is when they're given a set of requirements, they tend to fixate on one portion of the requirements. Even worse, the portion of the requirements that makes the most sense to them, because that'll be the easiest one to do, rather than concentrating on the whole problem. All right? So you need the name, the discussion of the problem, the solution, as it says, provides enough information where you can start writing the code, and the consequences of using a pattern. Sometimes using a pattern, there's bad things. You'll see this when we get started with one of these first patterns that we'll talk about in here, the singleton pattern. The idea is you have only one instance of one class. You understand what I'm saying? All right. And there's ramifications of doing that. Well, you wouldn't use that if I was going to make a class called person and I was going to create one for each one of you. That would make no sense. All right. So you've got to always understand the situation. So as he says, the rest of the chapter will introduce and demonstrate 4 different design patterns, all taken from that book, from this Gang of 4. I'm not going to read this, but that's the book. And he talks about it in here. Again, I'm not going to say another word about it. But notice what he says here. There's no way that you can go through an entire, just a chapter of a book and become experts on a concept. So the idea is to give you an initial exposure as to what design patterns are, how they're used, how they work, the different ones, some of the different ones that exist. All right. And again, that's what this chapter is about. So, first one that's discussed here is the one I already mentioned to you, the singleton pattern. Notice what it says. It creates only a single instance of a class type. So he gives you an example in here, and he says, well, if the goal is in your application, whatever you're working on, if you have only one database that you're connecting to, and you only need to connect to it basically once, then a singleton pattern would make some sense. All right. So again, it's always going to be dictated by the situation. So the author says, now this is all information that's in here that you've all heard before. It says, for starters, you can use a static attribute to guarantee there will only be one of them. Again, static, you already know this. In that case, static means one that's going to be shared. All right, and again, we have talked about this before. The next step, and yeah, this is a little funky to take a look at. Create a method that creates an instance of a class if one doesn't exist and otherwise returns it. All right. You know how we've set stuff in here? Show you an example of something that's done at least kind of like this. Remember this? Remember that at the top of a program? Session _ start. And if I said to you, what does that do? You'd say it starts a session. That's not true. What it does is it checks to see if there's already a session running, and if it does, it just continues on. If there's not a session running, it starts one. Do you understand the difference? It's a singleton. All right. And the idea is it checks, and it says, oh, if there is already an instance of me, all right, in other words, in this case, there wouldn't be an instance because the instance is equal to null. All right. So in that case, you would say something like this. If, basically, if you hadn't started a session yet, then you do the session start in there. All right. But it's not typically used for a thing like a session start. It's whether or not you want to create a class and an instance of the class. So the idea is this class is only going to have one instance. You say, well, give me an example. I've already given you one, but give me another example. Okay, let's say I create a class called God. Seriously. And I decide that, and again, I know it depends on the religion, because with some it'd be Allah. I'm not trying to be political. I'm not trying to be religious. But if we all agreed there was a God and there was one God, let's just, for the sake of argument, say we believe that. Then that's what I'd be doing right here. So they go through how to create a singleton class in here. That's what they do next. And they say that most of the time when you've got a singleton class, okay, what you'll have in there is you will have a method that's called getInstance that will see if you've already created the class. And if you have not yet created it, it will create it. So this is what he does. Let's just take a look at the code that's in here on 217 in here, and it's on 217 in your book also. All right, not that big, 40-some lines. In fact, let me just get to the actual code, which starts on line 12 here. So really, what, about 30 lines? If you take out the comments and you take out the blank lines, there's probably about half that. There's maybe 15 to 20 lines in here. All right, so it comes in here, and at the beginning, it supposes that you're going to have just one instance of a class. So that $_ instance, it's made static, all right? So it's null, but it's only going to be null the first time that's called. And if you change it after that, then it's going to be changed forever, all right? As you come in here and you start working with settings, does all of this make sense on line 18 here? That's a variable that's private, all right? In other words, it's only known within this class. Its name is $_settings, and as of right now, it holds an empty array. That should make sense to all of you by now. That's all stuff we've gone over before. All right. Here we've got a couple private functions. One is our constructor, and notice there's nothing in it. So if for some reason the constructor gets called, what happens? Nothing. And there's also a thing called clone. Now, you may or may not be aware of this. If I come in here in PHP, this is one of those objects here, if I'm working with objects. So if I come through here and I say class person, and I come through here, and I'm not going to even put anything in here. So I put in a bunch of junk. All right? And then later I come through here and I go person Jeff equals new person. Okay? Then later I want to say this. I want to say person Mike equals new person. Okay, I want to do that, but I'm lazy and I do this. The question is doing this the same thing as doing. All right, so are these two lines the same? And the answer is no. In this case, it creates a brand new area in memory, and it does whatever we told it to do inside of here. But in this case, what it does is it makes both Jeff and Mike point to the same area in memory. Does that make sense to people? All right? Because when you just do a direct assignment like this, what happens is PHP does what's called a shallow copy. All right? Literally, that's what it means. So what if I wanted to do this and I literally wanted to copy everything that was in Jeff over to Mike? Let's say that Jeff and Mike are twins, type of an idea. I have a brother Mike, but we're sure as hell not twins. You saw his hairline, you saw mine, you'd say, how are you two related? All right? So I can come in here and say something along the lines of this. And I may be giving you the wrong syntax, but it's more or less like that. So I can tell it to clone, which says take and make a copy of everything that's in Jeff and copy it over to Mike. Does that make sense to people? Yes. Yes. It's literally, twin is a good example. Like a kid comes out, the lady goes, oh, the doctor goes, there's another one. Lady goes, I'm not having twins, and doctor says, yes, you are. All right, so the first one, so they're each, let's just assume when they come out, they're basically identical twins. So they do look the same, their weights are the same and everything. Then you might want to do something like this. But yeah, to answer Mark's question, yes. That's called a deep copy. That copies everything. All right. So he goes through here, and he does a much better job than I do. He says, begin this new script. It's called config.php. Then start by defining a config class. All right. So that's what we're doing up here. All right. Declare two private attributes, which we already went over. Define a private constructor and a private clone method, again, that do nothing. That's what's in blue right now. Then next, starting on line 24, this is what we talked about before. This says, if you haven't created one yet, create it now. Otherwise, return the one that's already been created. That's in English. That's what's happening right there. All right. Then And we've got another method right here that's called set. And you can see it takes two arguments, an index and a value. And that's going to manipulate the settings array. That's going to, whatever you've got in there, that's going to make sure that whatever you define for that class gets thrown into this array right here that's called settings. What the author is using for this one, and you may or may not remember this because it's something that he talked about in an earlier chapter and we talked about last semester, is when you're debugging, you're going to have some kind of a flag in there that's called live. And if it's set to false, you're in debug mode. If it's set to true, you're in production mode. That's what he's using in here for this example. Not saying that's a great example or it's not, but that's the one that he uses. All right, so that's the set. We also have a get that's used to return what the current setting is. All right, and that's it for the whole class. So what they have us do then, if you take a look at what's out here, and I'm going to try this again now and see why it didn't work before. In fact, let me. It looks like even though it said it was open, or it was up and running, I'm going to try starting it up again. And that's the problem. Get over here. All right. So it says here that that's running, but I'm going to stop it and start it again anyway. Close all that down. Close that down. All right. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to tell it start up XAMPP, start Apache, start MySQL. It should be fine. Come in here now. That was me. There. And there they are. Okay? So that config file doesn't do anything because it doesn't instantiate any object. All right? So when you run it, it doesn't show anything. But the singleton that they want you to run with it, okay, that just shows a couple settings. That's all that this thing does. So they tell you as far as how to use it, okay, that singleton class that's in here, so that's something I'm working on for later. I can do it from here anyway, that's fine. Plus. So this is the whole singleton class. Again, what happens from these, what I think, for lack of better words, is nice, is if you look in here, the class literally ends right there, and it starts. I guess we can't put the whole thing in here. All right? And it's not even a class. We're requiring that config file. All right? We're creating an object if it hasn't been created, and otherwise we're not. It's already been created. And all we've got here is this thing we're setting right there. And all that's doing is that's adding an element to our array. Okay? And really, it's an associative array. So its key is live and its value is true. All right? And then we come through here and we create a second object. So we've got an object called config, and we create another one that's called test. All right? And notice they put in here live and live. Well, what if we have this and we put in here dead? All right, just to see the difference. Should still work. Again, I've been wrong before, but undefined index dead at line 39. All right? So in there, oh, that's the index. I'm sorry. So, yeah, I got to go and get, that's got to be live. But we should be able to come through here. I don't know if it'll, oh, we're making it, okay, we're going to try this anyway. I don't think this is going to work. I think I'm going to get an error message, but we'll see. Nope, it didn't let me. So there could be only, if you say, well, how could you do two of them? You said you could only do one. Yeah, one config class, one test class. That make sense? And I should also be able to come in here that says call the parent. All right. All right. And again, I don't know if this will work or not, but I'm trying it anyway. Nope, doesn't like it. It only gives me the first thing that's in. The idea, though, is, and the example that he gave, this is a real weird example. The example I gave you before, something like a database connection, that's what you typically make as a singleton. If you're working on a very simple app, or if you're working on an app that's got very, when I say app, I just mean a whole application, not a mobile app necessarily, but something that has very small boundaries, you might use a singleton. Again, he does much better than I do. He goes through it, and then he explains it on page 219. Then on 220, the factory pattern. This is the second of four. It says, unlike singleton, which creates and manages a single object of a single class type, the factory pattern is used to manufacture potentially multiple objects of many different classes. Think about what factory means. You know, when you think about a factory, and you think about an assembly line. So again, if I was going to create a person class and create an instance of a person class for every one of my students, or let's say BTC was, and they were going to do one for every one of their students, then a factory would make sense. Now, notice what it says here. The factory pattern is useful in situations where the type of object that needs to be generated isn't known when the program is written, but only once the program is running. In other words, it's a dynamic app. It's late binded. All right. Now go back, and I think this is one. This might even be the one that they use in here. But think about this. All right. Let's suppose that we were talking about before I guess it was last week when we talked about that pet example. All right. So let's say the program's running, and we have created an instance of pet. We're able to do that, but not until the program is actually running are we able to figure out, based on a question we ask, let's say, whether that pet is a dog or whether that pet is a cat. You understand what I'm saying? So things that a pet can do, a dog can do, and a cat can do. They're generic things. But until I find out whether it's a cat or whether it's a dog, maybe it's something as simple as speak. And do you purr or say meow, or do you bark or say woof, type of an idea. But the idea is factory patterns can be used, as it says, all right, when things are not configured totally until runtime, when the program's running. It says another time you might use these is if there's an abstract base class. All right. So what he ends up doing in here is he goes back to that shape example. And when I started doing this, mine didn't work. And I couldn't figure out why until I went back and reread the chapter. I think this is the one. And reread it, and took a little bit of time, because when you and we'll look at this in just a second, but when you read it, you can't just call the routine. You've got to pass it parameters. All right? And what the heck are you even talking about, Jeff? Well, let's take a look at the code that's in the book here. First, they talk about shape factory on page 221. So I'm going to bring that one up. Again, not very big. Abstract class shape factory. All right, create the type you want to create and the size you want to create. And notice the only two types of shapes right now we can create are rectangles. And notice if we create a rectangle, we have to pass in two different parameters. If we call a triangle, we've got to pass in three different parameters. Does that make sense? If it was maybe an octagon, you might have to pass in 8 parameters. That type of an idea. All right, but we can create as many of these as we want, but when we do it, we have to make sure we follow the rules. All right, so this is shape factory, and it's all explained. And notice we're going to be using shape in here, and triangle, and rectangle, so we have to require all those. And this is where we come in and start to actually create the shapes then. Okay, I'm sorry, this is actually in here, this is our factory.php, and we're going to end up calling in here. What the first one does is it's going to figure out basically the type of shape we're working with. All right, then the next one, our factory is going to say, okay, basically, all right, find out the area. And you're going to find out the area it's going to be differently for a square, or I'm sorry, a rectangle as opposed to a triangle. All right. Then when we come in here and actually try to run this is what I wanted you to see. Is notice we've got to add stuff to it. So I'm going to run this and show you what I mean. The first time I run this, there's going to be a mistake in here, and that's fine. So the first time we run this, there'll be a mistake. So notice again, shape factory, run it, nothing happens. Factory, run it, says please provide a shape and a size. All right. So again, what they want in here are parameters. So I'm going to put it exactly what they show in the book. Shape, well, you can see I've got them in there already. Shape equal triangle, and the dimensions are 5, 10, and 13. That's the same stuff that they used in the last chapter. So the system knows, based on what I passed it, that we're creating a triangle. And figure out the area of a triangle based on the formula for an area of a triangle, and the perimeter based on the area or the perimeter for a triangle. On the other hand, if I run this again and I put in rectangle, then notice now I only pass it 2 parameters. Right. And again, he does, I think at least, a pretty good job, I'm sure much better than I just did, of walking you through this on pages 220, 221, 222, and 223. So we're spending an hour or so on stuff that whole books have been written about. All right, just so at least you've been introduced to them. Again, not beyond the realm of possibility, you could go in for a job interview, depending on the type of job and what position you were going in for, and you could be asked, what do you know about design patterns? They're not looking for you to spit back at them. There's 23 of them. Here they are. That's not impressing anybody. But even if you just knew these 4, or you looked through the list and you picked out a few of them that you thought would be the most usable, and you could say 30 seconds or so about each one. Now this would probably be more, not for a programming job. I would say that if you're going to be asked anything about design patterns, it'd probably be more in the line of an analyst type of job. And they want to know how you think, given a problem, how you would attempt to solve it. The third one that starts on page 225 and it goes on for the next 7 or 8 pages is the composite pattern. It says the first 2 we talked about, singleton and factory, are creational. They're used to create objects. Another category is structural. As it says, these apply in situations where a non-traditional class structure or a modification is required. For example, it says they want to introduce composite. And I want to introduce composite in my own way. Okay? Let's assume for a second that I ask you to come in here and write a PHP program that's going to simulate a clock. We'll call it an alarm clock. Okay? So what types of data elements would an alarm clock have? Well, yeah, but even more than that. How about hours, minutes, and seconds? Right? Maybe not seconds, but at least hours and minutes. Okay? And then going along with what Travis just said, maybe set alarm type of an idea, maybe a get alarm so you can find out when it was set for. All right? And there might be other things. Okay? Now, yeah, there's all sorts of different things. But, so let's say that first we developed a clock. Okay? And then we come in and we develop an alarm clock. Well, an alarm clock is a clock, right? So we would develop the clock and then we would use an extents. Does that make sense? All right. Now let's suppose that we create something else. I don't know what, but let's assume, okay, I'm not going to say that's terrible. going to say let's assume we're ISIS, and I don't want to assume that. But let's assume well, I'm going to make it even a little more obscure than that. Let's assume that we're going to be making some kind of a bomb, and we want to put a timer on it. Okay, you with me? So the bomb isn't a clock, and it's not an alarm clock, but a bomb could have it as a member, could have an alarm clock in it to trigger it, correct? So instead of an is-a, you have a has-a relationship. When you're talking about composite objects, they're objects that contain other objects as part of them. Does that make sense? All right. So for instance, if I was going to create a car object, I might say that a car object has in it window objects, door objects, tire objects, and a whole bunch. And it has a, so a car has a door object type of an idea. So normally when you're talking about composition, that's what you're talking about, is a has a type of relationship. So the author says here, for example, an HTML form contains one or more form elements. From a programmatic perspective, certain behaviors will apply to both. In other words, if you look at this, the author's saying right here, whether you're showing an entire form or whether you just are talking about a single element on a form, you might want to display just an element or the entire form. You might want to validate just the element or the entire form. You might want to show the errors that are connected to just the element or the entire form. So that's what the author's saying here. And rather than writing two different classes or even doing extensions, as he says there, the idea there is to apply a composite so that the entire form or just an individual component are treated the same. All right. Now he gets off here, and I don't know if this is good or bad, but he starts talking about object-oriented and about, with object-oriented, a hierarchy of object orientation. And what he says here is, if you've got a hierarchy, okay, and it says hierarchy is a tree-like structure, and he says if you wanted to do that, you might have a whole bunch of abstract classes in there and a whole bunch of classes. And you might find out later that you would create a big superclass that would contain all the other classes or be composed of those other classes. And that's what he gets to in here. All right. Again, the explanation I gave wasn't nearly as nice as what he has in the book. All right. So he talks about this composite diagram on 226, and he shows the code on 227. Notice what he wants to be able to do in here. He's got a thing called work unit. And he says that if you're going to use the work unit class, which is abstract, in other words, it can't be nude, you must implement an add function for employees and a remove function for employees and an assign function or assign task function for employees and a complete task function for employees. Okay? Then he says, okay, now we've got this thing called team that extends work unit. Okay? So he comes through here, and let's just go through what he says, because like I said, I'll ball it up, and I don't want to. All right. So create the work unit. Make it abstract. Put in a couple protected attributes. Remember what protected is. All right. Since employee down there is going to extend work unit, and it's protected, it can automatically change these. So these are the tasks. That's the name. Write a simple constructor. Define a getName method. Identify your abstract methods. Complete the class. Then, since, again, these are all abstract, add, remove, assign task, and complete task, when you go and you come in here and you extend work unit for team, you have to write an add, you have to write a remove, you have to write an assign, you have to write a complete. All right? And it says the method for removing team members from the composite is for removing team members from a composite object. Okay? So you're able to remove different types of things at runtime based on what you pass to it, is what he's getting to. All right? So let's see if we can run this one. One of these didn't work very well when I tried it, but I'm going to try this anyway. Then we're going to take a break. All right. So there was composite. No, that's the final one. was work unit, and that doesn't do anything. All right, that's all the code you saw. Then there's composite. All right. And again, notice this. It may not seem like a big thing. That's two different types of tasks. That's tasks that could be completed by one person, and that's a task that could be completed when you would need more than one person or maybe a team of people. That's what he's getting to on the example that he has right here. All right. And I'll tell you what, I only have 4 or 5 more pages. Just let me finish. I'm sorry it's going a little longer. But the last thing that's discussed in here, the last pattern, is the strategy pattern, starting on page 233. And as he mentions, strategy is a behavioral pattern used to address how the application runs. And the best example I can give you of a behavior pattern is, let me ask you this. How many of you in here have more than one kid? All right. Okay, there's at least a couple of you. Okay. Do you treat your kids the same? I mean, do you always treat them exactly the same? No. I know that with my 3 kids, part of it's an age thing. The little one gets away with stuff the older one never got away with, etc. No, I'm just saying that's the way that it is. But with a strategy pattern, what you're saying is you want to be able to come up with a similar situation, but treat it in different ways. So the example that the author gives in here as an example is, okay, what if we wanted to be able to bring in a web page? So let's say that you were doing some kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? Where you've got a bulletin board or something where you have posts. Okay. Well, I might want to be able to come in there, and first of all, I want to be able to come in, and I want to strip out, in case anybody put any HTML in there, I want to strip it out because they might be trying to do SQL injection or something else. All right. Second, I want to run through it, and I want to say, did they put any swear words in there? I want to get rid of those. And third, is there anything that they put in there that could possibly make it go to a spam filter? The only thing in common is I'm going to apply all 3 of these to different strings. But the way I'm going to handle them is totally different. So there's no commonality other than that. So the author says this would be a great place, all right, that you could use a strategy pattern. Plus, you can apply it differently on the fly. So you could run through the same code 3 times if you needed to. The first time you'd go through to strip out the HTML. The second time would be for the swear words. The third time would be for those character combinations. That's what he does in here. All right. So he creates an HTML filter class. And notice he's got swear filter that implements filter. So he creates this, and it implements filter. And that'll handle all of this. So in other words, you will be able to handle 3 different types of situations using the same code. All right. You'll have to write different methods to do each one. But it's like again, I want to be able to sit there and have a strategy for all 3 of my kids. Even though if that's kid A, I'm going to have to do it one way. If that's kid B, I'm going to have to do it another way. And if that's kid C. So I'm going to be doing the same type of thing. There'll be something in common, but there'll be something else that's very different. And that's what he gets to. And he shows the I sort thing that's in here. And guess what? We've actually looked at something similar to this before. And if we run the strategy, so what is he doing here? Remember this from an earlier chapter? He's doing sorts on 3 different things. He's got an array that's in no kind of order whatsoever. Then he sorts it based on the name. Then he sorts it in descending order based on the grade. All right. So he's the same data. You want to do a similar type of operation in this case, but you're doing it based on different fields. Now he did it earlier without using a design pattern, but he comes back in the rest of the chapter here. He uses a design pattern to do it. All right. And mercifully, that's the end of the chapter. So I'm done.